Labour Party made a lot of noise about being the party of business, being pro-business and so on. And I think gradually the disappointment, if you like, has set in actually what that's meant in practice. I'm Duncan Edwards, I'm the CEO at British American Business. We are the leading transatlantic trade association, Chamber of Commerce. We're both the American Chamber of Commerce in the UK, so where we represent US companies doing business in the UK. And we're also the British Chamber of Commerce here in the United States, doing the reciprocal thing, so representing UK companies that are here. And I suppose above all, what we're trying to be is a positive voice for trade and investment and for business in this incredible corridor, this astonishing economic corridor that exists between the US and the UK.
What are your biggest economic concerns right now about the state of the British economy?
Well, I suppose, look, I think the US investor has been a huge supporter of the UK economy over recent decades. So corporates in particular have chosen the UK as the most likely place for them to put capital to work, to put people to work, and to build their kind of European bridgehead over the last 30 plus years. And so that installed base is, still exists and is very powerful. Yeah, there are definitely concerns about the direction of travel in the UK, and I think that falls into a number of areas. So first of all, during the run-up to last year's election, there was the Labour Party made a lot of noise about being the party of business, being pro-business and so on. And I think gradually the disappointment, if you like, has set in actually what that's meant in practice. So particularly the budget last year, where the majority of the new tax that was raised fell onto business, particularly in the form of national insurance contributions. But then there are other things which business feels concerned about. So the NIC cost is an important one, but the Employment Rights Bill for companies that have large human capital requirements, a sense that the regulatory burden is growing in the UK, complexity and cost of dealing with regulation. And finally, for industries which are energy intensive, then the UK has the highest energy costs in the world. So if energy is a big input into your business, then that's becoming a serious consideration. And that's not just kind of old style heavy industry, but the new kind of data center businesses as well, which are very energy intensive. So these are real issues to be concerned about. My sense is, look, we're not seeing a wholesale exit of US companies from the UK, far from it. In fact, around the time of the state visit 2 weeks ago, there were a lot of announcements of new investment going to the UK, which is very, very positive. But the government needs to be conscious that not everyone is completely happy about the direction of travel.
We're here in New York City, obviously a huge financial centre, not only in America, but in the world. And obviously you have a lot of experience in American investment in the UK. As you say, there seems to be some concerns. How do you sort of assess that? To what extent are these concerns realising in terms of actual investment? Do you think there's been less investment or fewer investments because of, say, the budget last year or because of, say, the upcoming budget this year?
Well, the data isn't clear about that yet. So we'll see over time what the impact on investment dollars into the UK actually is. As I said, all of the announcements that were made last week or 2 weeks ago, coinciding with the state visit, were extremely positive to the UK, and the UK government did a good job in aggregating all those announcements. The challenge is, of course, that although those announcements were made in good faith by the companies, then they're still contingent. there is a difference between promised dollars and actual dollars, and there'll be hurdles to overcome before those investments are actually made. I mean, in some cases, you've got civil nuclear power commitments which require approval, and even the technology needs approval, and then you've got to go through planning and so on and so forth, and then you've got to be happy with the commercial terms as well. So all of these things have to be done. I'm not saying that these investments won't get made, but they are still contingent. And I think the US investor community is looking carefully at the UK to see, how business friendly it's actually going to be there in the coming years.
And just on this upcoming budget, Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, has a significant black hole which she has to fill, and there's some talk of tax rises yet again. Obviously, they said last year that we won't see any more, but it seems likely that they will raise taxes again. Again, is this a concern to business people both in the States and in the UK?
Well, look, the concept of actually spending less money by government seems to have somewhat gone out of fashion, which I think some people find disappointing. I follow the UK news very closely, and it looks absolutely certain that taxes will rise in the budget in November. Clearly, we don't know where those taxes will fall. I think we, along with many other trade associations, have made it very clear that they should not fall again directly on business. But I think wherever they fall, you've got to be very careful, because it's the overall burden of taxation that is the issue here. And whether it falls in the form of income tax or VAT or some form of wealth tax, increased capital gains taxes, increased inheritance taxes, these are all disincentives to wealth creation. So I think one has to be very careful about that.
Labour and Starmer, as you said, when they first got elected, they were talking a lot about growth, and this was their number one priority was growth. And they actually went to some of the regulators in Britain and asked for their advice on how to improve economic growth. And some people criticised them for that, because they said, well, why do you go to the regulators? Why don't you go to businesses who actually know how to make profit and make money and so on? So do you feel that Starmer and...
Well, I think they did both, in fairness to them. Sure. I think they did, there was a lot of dialogue with business, both prior to the election and since. But that doesn't mean that the recommendations of businesses have been accepted. And in most cases, they haven't.
So do you feel that overall this is a pro-growth British government? Do you think Starmer has lived up to that mantra?
I mean, it's hard to square the circle, isn't it? I think that the administration is genuine in their desire for economic growth. I mean, what government wouldn't be? I mean, saying we're an anti-growth government, that doesn't sound like an election-winning strategy. So clearly this administration wants to see economic growth in the UK, but whether they've chosen the right tools to deliver that, I think, is very much in question.
Let's move to the US. There's an election coming up here in November in New York City for the mayor, and there's been a lot of controversy around this from some business leaders who are concerned about Mamdani, in particular, the front runner. He said that he doesn't like billionaires. He wants to introduce higher taxes on wealthy people and businesses and so on. Is there some concern in New York about Mamdani and the mayoral election coming up?
Yeah, I mean, New York City is one of the great miracles of the world in terms of concentration of business and so on. So I think there is some concern about policies that have been espoused by the leading candidate for mayor here, Zoran Mamdani, that may be disincentives for both individuals and for companies. I think we have to be a little careful about that here, because the actual power that a mayor has to levy taxes is fairly limited. So most of that power rests either with the state government or the federal government. So there'll be limits on what he'll be able to do. There is an affordability crisis in New York City. I think that is true. It's an incredibly expensive place to live. If you are a kind of middle earner. And I think that needs to be addressed, and I think the business community wants to address that in partnership with the government, the local government here. But I think just levying taxes on wealthy individuals and increasing corporation taxes is not going to be the right approach, because they have choices, and this is, it's easy to move in the United States.
As you say, he has fairly limited powers when it comes to taxation, but he can do something. So he wants to raise the minimum wage to $30 an hour by 2030. He wants government-run grocery stores. He wants to freeze rents in some government-controlled buildings in New York. How do you think that will impact the local economy of New York overall? Do you think there could be inflation and things like that? Is there some concern there?
Look, I think there's broad concern about a whole range of the policies that Mamdani has talked about during the campaign, and I think one has to be careful here that things that are discussed during an election campaign are not the same as policies that get executed, particularly in these kind of mayoral elections. Look, I think he's absolutely convinced in his view that the minimum wage needs to rise, that there is an affordability crisis, that rents in the private sector are too high, and a lot of it's true. So, but whether his solutions to those are the right ones, I think would not be widely accepted in the business community.
He calls himself a democratic socialist, and as I said, he uses this rhetoric which is quite anti, at least wealthy people. He says about billionaires, there shouldn't be any billionaires. That seems to go against the philosophy of New York, or what made New York such a wealthy city. I mean, would you agree with that? I mean, what do you make of the kind of rhetoric around socialism and billionaires and so on? And do you think that kind of contradicts why New York is so successful, or has been?
Well, this is a staunchly Democrat city that has consistently voted for Democrats to represent this city in Washington and locally. Look, I think there's a mixture of views here. There's clearly a pure capitalist streak in New York City, particularly in financial services, that has been extraordinarily successful in wealth creation, both for the companies and for individuals here. And I don't think that's going anywhere.
On the kind of broader state of the US economy, with Trump coming in earlier this year, it seems that the economy hasn't improved as much as some people hoped for, particularly when you look at the jobs numbers. What's your overall assessment of the US economy today?
Yeah, look, I think the US economy is doing fine, and particularly on a kind of comparative basis globally, it looks pretty strong. Certainly some of the predictions both ways in terms of growth have not been correct. So some people were predicting a disaster, and some people were predicting even better growth figures than we've seen. The test will be over the next few years, won't it? So, I mean, clearly the overall economic policy of this administration is to attract more investment into the United States. So the message that the president has been sending has been, if you want to sell things to Americans, you need to make them in America. And that has been the message that he's been sending through his tariff policy, through his tax policy, and all these other things. And we'll see whether it works. I mean, the anecdotal evidence is that there is a lot of capital being deployed into the US, including by UK companies. And maybe they're concerned about the downside if they don't, the tariff risk. I think that's certainly true. But there's also the opportunity. Most international companies would like to increase their exposure to the US market. It's a great market. It's the best market in the world. So most of them would like to do that. And now the incentives and disincentives are aligned make that happen. So it's a very interesting moment because there is genuinely a global kind of competition for capital investment. UK's in that race, looking for companies to invest in the UK. US is now flexing its muscles to try to attract inward investment that had previously gone internationally. So everyone's in the game, and I think, by the way, that a lot of the tools that have been introduced by this administration are here for the fairly long term. It's hard to imagine a candidate in 2028 standing on a platform of kind of globalization and removing tariffs and encouraging companies to outsource to lower cost jurisdictions around the world. It just doesn't feel that that's going to happen. Politically, it won't make sense. So yeah, this feels like the new normal, and I think that's how companies are dealing with it and working with it.
Okay. Duncan Edwards, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.